Sociolinguistics of International Languages. Introduction. What is an international language? Sometimes called universal language. A language intended to be used by people of different linguistic backgrounds to facilitate communication among them. An international language is usually intended not to supplant existing mother tongues or languages. It is intended to play a secondary or auxiliary role as it furthers international communication. Example: English has changed from a relatively unimportant European language with perhaps 4 million speakers into an international language used in every continent by approximately 800 million people. Laurito Todd and Ian Hancock, International English Usage, 1986. The success of English in its function as an international auxiliary language has often been regarded as a measure of its adequacy for the job. Manfred Gorlick, Veritas Delectat, in Nixon and Honey, An Historic Tongue, 1988. English is considered an important medium for communication across the world. It has evolved from centuries and has found a place in every country. All the countries are working with each other via business relations. And here the most important thing is communication. This is why one should learn English to explore global opportunities. Dominant in the USA. The USA is a powerful nation which is the global leader in the fields of business, sports, science, technology, and entertainment. Here, English is the dominant language, and this is the main reasons for English as a global language. Considered at UN and EU, the preferred language is English at international organizations like United Nations and across the European countries. English may not be the official language in European countries, but it is widely accepted as an important language. Default language. English is considered the default language globally in academics, science, and technology, business, films and music, news distribution, literature, and others. English in the global market. The acceptance of international brands, every discovery, and the invention is necessary for countries such as Canada, USA, Australia and UK. These countries are English dominant, and all the marketing is done through English communication. This leads to using of English communication mandatory for growing business. The Internet is English-based. The contents on the web are almost English. The Internet has content that is preferably in English, and to utilize its power, English is important. Hence, to use the Internet, one must know English at the basic level. International languages. Examples: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian and Spanish are the 6 official languages of the United Nations. English and French are the working languages of the United Nations Secretariat and are used in day-to-day professional exchanges. According to David Crystal, 1997, a language achieves a global status when it develops a special role that is recognized in every country. Crystal, 1997, argues that there are 2 ways in which a global language is built. A language can be made the official language of a country, which means that the language is used as a medium of communication, second language. Or a language can be adopted as a foreign language in the educational system. In this case the language has no official status. Compare Crystal 1997, 3. To understand what Crystal means by his definition of a global language / international language, it is necessary to define some other terms. A foreign language is a language which is not spoken by the indigenous people of a certain place. In contrast to that, a second language is any language, other than the first or native language. It is typically used because of geographical or social reasons. By speaking of an official language, we mean a language that is given a unique legal status in the countries, states and other territories, typically the language used in a nation's legislative bodies. Consequently, a global /international language can be characterized by wide dispersion and acceptance around the world as a native language, and more important, as a non-native language. Compare Jeskowski 2001, 8. It is spoken all around the world, while English is not the official language in many countries, except Great Britain, USA, Australia, New Zealand, as well as several Caribbean countries and other territories. It is the language which is most often taught as a second or foreign language all over the world. Furthermore, it is very often the working language for business and science, so the main indication of its global status is the widespread acceptance as a first, second or foreign language. Crystal, 1997, 29, claims that there are two main reasons why English is the global language and not some other. Firstly, he defines the geographical historical reasons, and secondly, he discusses the socio-cultural aspect. The combination of these two strands has brought into existence a language which consists of many varieties, each distinctive in its use of sounds, grammar and vocabulary. The first reason was the expansion of British colonial power since the 16th century, which marks the beginning of the spread of English. At this time, settlements of English speakers in many parts of the world started, for example North America, India, Australia, African countries, Caribbean islands, and South Pacific territories. Firstly, the English succeeded in establishing a permanent settlement at Jamestown in 1607, colony of Virginia in the Americas. The second aspect for the importance of English is because the United States holds the leading economic power from the 20th century. Compare Crystal 1997, 59, Goodall 1997, 14. The rise of the United States during the 20th century, especially after World War II, caused the leading position of English in the world. The time of colonization came to an end at the end of the 19th century, and most of the other languages lost their influences, but not English. Because of the importance of the United States, English is not only the language of science and technology but also leads consumer culture. An important socio-cultural aspect could be the entertainment factor. Most cinema films were produced in the US, and so the United States became a leading power concerning entertainment throughout the world. Hollywood, Disney World, Film Awards, Society, Famous People. Definitions of the term lingua franca are worldwide approved, and the most common definition of the term lingua franca is given by the UNESCO. A lingua franca is a language which is used habitually by people whose mother tongues are different in order to facilitate communication between them. UNESCO quoted in Adler 1977:103, thus, a lingua franca is any language widely used beyond its native speakers, primarily for international commerce but extending to other cultural exchanges, such as diplomacy. The origin of the term lingua franca is Italian, literally Frankish language. History of the term lingua franca. Today it is assumed that the term lingua franca originated from the varied contacts of the speakers from different Romanesque languages with the speakers of other languages, above all in the southern Mediterranean area. Compare Kirschbaumer 1994, 13. During the Roman Empire, Greek was the lingua franca in the East and Latin was the lingua franca in the West. It is accepted that the first lingua franca developed among tradesmen and sailors in the Mediterranean area around the 9th century. This so-called trade jargon consisted mainly of Latin elements, which were used as the language of trade with the local population, as well as parts of French, Provençal and Italian. This new language was called lingua franca. Philipson, 1992. Linguistic Imperialism, book. The author is a lecturer in English and language pedagogy at Roskilde University Centre in Denmark. The work was first published by Oxford University Press in 1992. Philippson's aims, 1992, to explore the means by which the contemporary phenomenon of English has become so dominant. To determine the extent to which the language has been promoted as an instrument of foreign policy by hegemonic English-speaking countries. To analyze the language policies inherited by Third World countries from colonial times so that the real scope of aid as support for educational development can be displayed and the intention of perpetuating the state of inequalities between countries can be clearly identified. To analyze the ideology transmitted with, in and through English language teaching, ELT, to analyze the role of language specialists and cultural export of English for that end. ELT demands a serious analysis since it is showing more characteristics of an industry than of a profession. The power of English and the power of ELT around the world has to be put under discussion. For example, the successful promotion of English throughout the world has been prompted by the global linguistic marketplace, in which the fashion of linguistic borrowing plays a main role. The dominant position of English in science, technology, medicine and many other fields and, for that reason, neologisms and word borrowing tend to be common these days. This excessive use of those linguistic resources is putting in risk essential cultural and linguistic values of societies worldwide. Contemporary language policies are determined by the state of the market, demand, and the force of argument. Rational planning in the light of available facts. English is equated around the world with progress and prosperity. However, the truth is that in third world countries, the wealth that English provides access to is very inequitably distributed. And no matter how aid to those countries increase, the gap between them and the rich north rather widens. 1992 uses the metaphor of center-periphery. This concept was a contribution of dependence theory, developed by Latin American social scientists in the middle of the 20th century, to contrast core English-speaking countries and periphery English countries. The clear tendency of the first ones, core English-speaking countries, is to advocate for monolingualism, against bilingualism and multilingualism. Philippson, 1992, remarks the idea of monolingualism as having a long pedigree, 19p, since ancient Greek stigmatized as barbarians speakers of other languages. Today, monolingualism is claimed to be the condition for modernization, while multiplicity of languages is rather a nuisance. In the view of Philippson, 1992, English needs to be seen as one language in a multilingual framework both internationally and within core English-speaking countries. However, Anglo-American monolingualism is rather impacting other countries negatively. This center-periphery dialectic is the source of all kinds of abuse like discrimination to immigrants, racism, the English-only standard, forcing people to language and culture assimilation. It is a matter of power and control, whose dynamics put English teachers in a central position for disseminating this logic under the premise and promise of modernization that peripheral countries require and deserve. Terms like tribe and dialect, vernacular, lingua franca, underdevelopment, modernization and third world, among others, are all terms that include an ideological load favoring hegemonic countries and establishing a set of assumptions to see peripheral societies always in a position of inferiority. In addition, the term linguicism, of which linguistic imperialism is a subtype, is defined here and given special treatment. Linguicism is defined as ideologies, structures and practices which are used to legitimate, effectuate and reproduce an unequal division of power and resources, both material and immaterial, between groups which are defined on the basis of language. Thus, English linguistic imperialism is that the dominance of English is asserted and maintained by the establishment and continuous reconstitution of structural and cultural inequalities between English and other languages. Philippson, 1992. p. 47. Earlier work relevant to linguistic imperialism. Fishman, 1972, as cited by Philipson, 1992, who analyzes the choice of a national language or national languages in periphery countries, especially former British colonies. Here, the modernization-oriented elites justify the use of English, former colonial language, as a way to retain aid and keep trained personnel in order to meet the immediate operational demands of nationhood. In language planning, again, tendencies established by the market actually rule the favoring of English rather than other languages, even in large peripheral countries, like India. In Colonial Linguistic Inheritance, Philipson, 1992, quotes Defoe, 1965. There are appealing words used to introduce the topic of the essential role of proficiency in English for functioning properly in colonial and peripheral countries. Educational policies have been designed from core English nations to serve their interests, among which was the establishment of educated local elites who function as interpreters in the first stages of the settlements. Britain and United States have promoted English worldwide. After World War II, both the United Kingdom and the United States started campaigns of promotion of their languages in peripheral world. On one side, the British Council is presented as an instrument of propaganda with a facade of autonomy. On the other side, the United States created several organizations to promote English and, more than that, replace Britain as the center of English language diffusion. The role of ESL profession in promoting U.S. major interests. In the context of war and post-war, American ESL and applied linguistics were dominated by linguists rather than by educationalists. Scientific and educational imperialism ensured the accumulation of expertise and theory building in the center. IG. The use of English experts from the center. The educational language planning for underdeveloped countries has included several tenets regarding the teaching of English. These tenets are included in Makerere Report, 1961, and its English-only policy. The first one is that English is better taught monolingually. The second, the ideal of English teachers as a native speaker. The earlier the English is taught, the better the results. The more the English is taught, the better the results. If other languages are used much, standards of English will drop. All those tenets are seen as fallacies. First of all, they show a severe ethnocentrism and lack evidence that support those assumptions. Linguicism is said to have taken over from racism as a more subtle way of ranking social groups in contemporary world. Unfortunately, Philipson, 1992, states that monolingually oriented Europeans fail to recognize the linguistic richness of language varieties. Learners at all levels are presented only in European-American perspective. The unfair treatment of an individual or community based on their use of language focuses on ideologies, structures and practices which are used to legitimate, effectuate, regulate and reproduce an unequal division of power and resources, both material and immaterial, between groups which are defined on the basis of language. Skutnap-Kangas, 1988. The concept arose in comparison with other more established isms, such as racism, sexism, classism, and, later, ethnicism and ageism. There was equally clear discrimination on the basis of which language/s people spoke or signed, natively or otherwise, and how they spoke it, as in discrimination involving the social constructs of race, gender, and class. But the discrimination on the basis of language or one's mother tongue, had no name, therefore a label was needed. Likewise, there is discrimination on the basis of which language/s people do not speak/read/use/master. In many countries people who do not know English or do not know it well are stigmatized, pitted, and seen as deficient, by some others. In the same way, people whose mother tongue is not a standard variety of the language they use are often stigmatized. Thus, linguicism can apply to a. Which language s. one uses, b. how one uses them, and c. which language s. one does not use /no or one is not competent in, all according to the norms of those who arrogate to themselves the power to judge others by their languages. Linguicism can also occur intralingually. Lippy Green, 2012. Philipson, 1992, quotes Ngugi, 1981, who affirms that, because of British imperialist literature, our students are daily being confronted with the European reflection of itself, the European image. Our children are made to look, analyze and evaluate the world as made and seen by Europeans in this state of things. The educated people in peripheral countries internalize the values and points of view of the center countries until the point that the presence of native speakers is not necessary there. The cooperation of these scholars plus the assistance offered by the computers ensures the control of the periphery by core English countries. Arguments in linguistic imperialism discourse. 3 types of arguments in accordance with 3 types of power are presented by Philipson, 1992, making reference to Galtung, 1980, in order to understand how English is promoted and sold. Intrinsic arguments. They are related to the capacities, what English is, a rich, varied and noble language, well adapted for change. Extrinsic arguments. They are related to resources, what English has, textbooks, dictionaries, grammar resources, trained teachers. Functional arguments. They are related to users. What English does, English provides access to modernization, science and technology. All these kinds of discourse are constitutive of the logic of power in language teaching and marketing. Is a term used to describe the exploitation of the ideological, cultural and elitist power of English for the economic and political advantage by dominant English-speaking cultures, used to describe the different language resources available to a single person and the values associated with each resource. Pierre Bourdieu, 1986. Bourdieu describes linguistic capital as a form of cultural capital, and specifically as the accumulation of a single person's linguistic skills that predetermines their position in society as delegated by powerful institutions. Cultural capital, on the other hand, is an accumulation of knowledge, skills, and other cultural acquisitions, which is enhanced by educational or technical qualifications. As a form of communication, language mediates human interactions and is a form of an action itself. Language is understood as a form of capital that is mediated through social power relations. These power relations are reflected through language when one's language is decided to be legitimate, allowing access to economic and social opportunities such as jobs, services, and connections. Linguistic capital has been used to describe the different language resources available to a single person and the values associated with each resource. Today, this term is used to look at the way in which these resources play a role in power dynamics at all levels, from individual, familial, institutional, governmental, and international roles. Bourdieu's theories on capital are effective in showcasing how various skills and resources gathered over an individual or group's lifetime will have different values and connotations depending on the situation when and where those resources are recognized and valued, often for the benefit or enhancement of the lives of the dominant social group. They can be converted into capital. The notion of the market value of a language refers to the ability of the language to bring social and economic benefits to its speaker. Languages have a market value and a non-market value. A language has market value if said language can be used for monetary gain, or if the language can be assigned a price. For example, if someone speaks language X, they have easier access to the economic and social well-being in the X-speaking communities, which in turn may lead to their financial gain. Jan Blomeyer, 2009, provides a clear example of how the high market value of the American English accent creates jobs for those who speak and know how to teach this accent, while also allowing some to consume this skill in the form of learning. In other situations, an employee earns more money simply because they speak language X. In these circumstances, language X has a high market value. The market value of a language is based on the symbolic power associated with the language as well as the language ideologies about the language and its speakers. According to Bourdieu, people's utterances can be seen as their linguistic products, and they can anticipate the value of their products in the marketplace through different contexts. Different speakers have different quantities of linguistic capital, that is, different speakers have different capacities to produce expressions that are valuable for a specific market. Power relationships in communication have emerged from critical language studies, sociolinguistics, conversation analysis, and the social psychology of language and communication. At the micro level, the power behind language is a speaker's possession of a weapon, money, high social status, or other attractive personal qualities. By revealing these qualities, the speaker influences the hearer. At the macro level, the power behind language is the collective power, ethno-linguistic vitality, of the communities that speak the language. The dominance of English as a global language and international lingua franca, for example, has less to do with its linguistic quality and more to do with the ethno-linguistic vitality of English speakers worldwide that it reflects. Language power relationships refer to the powers of language that are based on a language's communicative usefulness, versatility, and its broad range of communicative, social, and identity functions in meaning-making, social interaction, and language policies. Such language powers include, first, the power of language to maintain existing dominance in legal, sexist, racist, and ageist discourses that favor particular groups of language users over others. Another language power is its immense impact on national unity and discord. Another language power is its ability to create influence through single words, for example, metaphors, oratories, conversations and narratives in political campaigns, emergence of leaders, terrorist narratives, and so forth. Language is a natural human system of conventionalized symbols that have understood meanings. Through it, humans express and communicate their private thoughts and feelings as well as enact various social functions. The social functions include co-constructing social reality between and among individuals, performing and coordinating social actions such as conversing, arguing, cheating, and telling people what they should or should not do. Language is also a public marker of ethno-linguistic, national, or religious identity, so strong that people are willing to go to war for its defense, just as they would defend other markers of social identity, such as their national flag. So, these cognitive, communicative, social, and identity functions make language a fundamental medium of human communication. Language is also a versatile communication medium, often and widely used in tandem with music, pictures, and actions to amplify its power. The wide range of language functions and its versatility combine to make language powerful. The other part is that there is pre-existing power behind language which it reveals and reflects, thereby transferring extra-linguistic power to the communication context. It is thus important to explain the language power relationships and their implications for human communication. The major theoretical foundation that has underpinned the intergroup perspective is social identity theory, Tajfel, 1982, alongside relatively more specialized theories such as ethno-linguistic identity theory, Harwood et al., 1994, Communication Accommodation Theory, Palomares et al., 2016, and Self-Categorization Theory Applied to Intergroup Communication, Reed et al., 2005. So, language also reflects the collective /historical power of the language community that uses it. In the case of modern English, its preeminent status as a global language and international lingua franca has shaped the communication between native and non-native English speakers because of the power of the English-speaking world that it reflects, rather than because of its linguistic superiority. Thus, language has power of its own. This power allows a language to maintain the power behind it, unite or divide a nation, and create influence. For example, when negotiating with police, a gang may issue the threatening message, "Meet our demands, or we will shoot the hostages." The threatening message may succeed in coercing the police to submit. The message merely reveals the power of a weapon in their possession. Apart from revealing power, the gangsters may also cheat. As long as the message comes across as credible and convincing enough to arouse overwhelming fear, it would allow them to get away with their demands without actually possessing any weapon. In this case, language is used to produce an intended effect despite resistance by deceptively revealing a non-existing power base and planting it in the mind of the message recipient. The literature on linguistic deception illustrates the widespread deceptive use of language to produce intended effects. Robinson, 1996. Ethno-linguistic vitality. The language that a person uses reflects the language community's power. A useful way to think about a language community's linguistic power is through the ethno-linguistic vitality model. Burris et al., 1981, Harwood et al., 1994. Language communities in a country vary in absolute size overall and, just as important, a relative numeric concentration in particular regions. Francophone Canadians, though fewer than Anglophone Canadians overall, are concentrated in Quebec to give them the power of numbers there. Similarly, ethnic minorities in mainland China have considerable power of numbers in those autonomous regions where they are concentrated, such as Inner Mongolia, Tibet, and Xinjiang. Collectively, these factors form the demographic base of the language community's ethno-linguistic vitality, an index of the community's relative linguistic dominance. Another base of ethno-linguistic vitality is institutional representations of the language community in government, legislatures, education, religion, the media, and so forth, which afford its members institutional leadership, influence, and control. Such institutional representation is often reinforced by a language policy that installs the language as the nation's sole official language. The third base of ethno-linguistic vitality comprises socio-historical and cultural status of the language community inside the nation and internationally. In short, the dominant language of a nation is one that comes from and reflects the high ethno-linguistic vitality of its language community. Language maintains and reproduces existing dominance. For example, English has become a global language, an international lingua franca, and an indispensable medium for non-native English-speaking countries to participate in the globalized world. Philipson referred to this phenomenon as linguistic imperialism. Research on linguistic sexism has shown, for example, a man-made language such as English, there are many others, is full of sexist words and grammatical rules that reflect historical male dominance in society. Its uncritical usage routinely by both sexes in daily life has in turn naturalized male dominance and associated sexist inequalities. Spender, 1998. Similar other examples are racist, Razigal and Wodak, 2005, and ageist, Ryan et al., 1995, language styles. Professional languages are made by and for particular professions such as the legal profession, Dene, 1980, Mertzit al. 2016, Abba, 1982. The legal language is used not only among members of the profession, but also with the general public, who may know each and every word in a legal document but are still unable to decipher its meaning. So, communication between lawyers and their clients is not only problematic, but the public's continual dependence on the legal language contributes to the maintenance of the dominance of the profession. A nation of many people who, despite their diverse cultural and ethnic background, all speak in the same tongue and write in the same script would reap the benefit of the unifying power of a common language. The power of the language to unite peoples would be stronger if it has become part of their common national identity and contributed to its vitality and psychological distinctiveness. Such power has often been seized upon by national leaders and intellectuals to unify their countries and serve other nationalistic purposes. Patton, 2006. In China, for example, Emperor Qin Shi Huang standardized the Chinese script, Hanzi, as an important part of the reforms to unify the country after he had defeated the other states and brought the Warring States period, 475–221 BC, to an end. A similar reform of language standardization was set in motion soon after the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, AD 1644–1911, by simplifying some of the Hanzi and promoting Putonghua as the national standard oral language. In the post-colonial part of the world, language is often used to service nationalism by restoring the official status of their indigenous language as the national language whilst retaining the colonial language or, in more radical cases of decolonization, relegating the latter to non-official status. Yet language is a two-edged sword, it can also divide a nation. The tension can be seen in competing claims to official language status made by minority language communities, protest over maintenance of minority languages, language rights at schools and in courts of law, bilingual education, and outright language wars. Calvert, 1998, Devota, 2004. Power of single words. Learning a language empowers humans to master an elaborate system of conventions and the associations between words and their sounds on the one hand, and on the other hand, categories of objects and relations to which they refer. After mastering the referential meanings of words, a person can mentally access the objects and relations simply by hearing or reading the words. Apart from their referential meanings, words also have connotative meanings with their own social cognitive consequences. Together, these social cognitive functions underpin the power of single words that has been extensively studied in metaphors, which is a huge research area that crosses disciplinary boundaries and probes into the inner workings of the brain. Benedkit al. 2014, Landor et al. 2014, Marshall et al. 2007. A charismatic speaker may, by the sheer force of oratory, buoy up people's hopes, convert their hearts from hatred to forgiveness, or embolden them to take up arms for a cause. One may recall moving speeches, in English, such as Susan B. Anthony's on women's right to vote, Winston Churchill's "We Shall Fight on the Beaches," Mahatma Gandhi's "Quit India," or Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream." The speech may be delivered face-to-face to an audience, or broadcast over the media. The discussion below focuses on face-to-face oratories in political meetings. Oratorical power may be measured in terms of money donated or pledged to the speaker's cause, or, in a religious sermon, the number of converts made. Another measurement approach is to count the frequency of online audience responses that a speech has generated, usually but not exclusively in the form of applause. Audience applause affords researchers the opportunity to explore communicative and social psychological processes that underpin some aspects of the power of rhetorical formats.